A retired Navy SEAL stopped his red truck in the middle of a Colorado snowstorm. Beside the frozen mountain road, a starving German shepherd stood covered in ice, holding a blood-stained towel in his mouth. On the towel were 3 faded words: Elk Hollow Rescue Cabin. Grant Mercer stepped closer, but the dog did not run, did not bark, and did not ask to be saved. He turned his wounded head toward the dark pine woods where someone had tried to erase an old rescue shelter from the map. Then Grant saw the chain marks around the dog's neck, and behind the trees, headlights vanished into the storm. What the dog led him to would uncover a secret buried for years. If you believe God can send hope through a loyal dog, subscribe and help us reach 1,000 subscribers. What city are you watching from? Comment below. Snow buried Silver Ridge Pass with the quiet patience of something that had all night to win. The Colorado mountains rose on both sides of the road like dark walls behind a curtain of white. Pines bent under fresh weight. The sky had lost its color. Even the old county markers looked tired, half swallowed by drifts, their orange reflectors blinking weakly through the storm. Grant Mercer drove his red 1978 Ford pickup through it with both hands on the wheel and one foot ready for betrayal. The truck was old enough to complain about every mile. Its heater coughed more than it warmed. Its wipers dragged wet arcs across the windshield, then froze at the edges like they had given up halfway through a prayer. The hood rattled. The tires slipped twice near the upper bend, then found gravel again beneath the packed snow. Grant did not slow because he was afraid. He slowed because he had learned long ago that fear, when listened to properly, was sometimes just another word for information. He was 46, broad-shouldered and weathered, with a face that looked like it had been carved by bad winters and worse memories. His dark hair was threaded with gray at the temples, cut short but no longer military neat. A rough beard covered his jaw. His eyes were a hard blue-gray, the kind people called calm when they did not understand how much work calm required. He wore a red and black plaid flannel shirt beneath an old dark green field jacket, the kind issued to men who had spent too many nights pretending cold was a matter of discipline. The jacket was faded at the seams, torn at one cuff, and still carried the shape of a man who had once moved through the world with a team, a mission, and a reason not to look back. Grant Mercer had been a Navy SEAL for 17 years. Now, he was just a man driving toward his dead uncle's cabin with a folder of the state papers on the passenger seat and a plan simple enough to lie to himself with. Sell the cabin. Sell the truck if anyone wanted it. Sign whatever the lawyer put in front of him. Leave Silver Ridge before the mountains remembered his name. His uncle, Earl Mercer, had been 72 when his heart stopped in the woodshed behind the cabin. Earl had been wiry, narrow-faced, and stubborn enough to argue with weather reports. He had worn suspenders over flannel shirts, kept his white hair cut with kitchen scissors, and believed no storm was an excuse for leaving another person cold. To most people in Silver Ridge, Earl had been a retired road worker, a volunteer search and rescue hand, and the old man who stocked emergency blankets where the county forgot to. To Grant, he had been the last man in the family who still called every Christmas, even when Grant did not answer. That was a kind of love Grant had never known what to do with. The folder on the seat held a death certificate, a property valuation, a buyer's letter, and a note Earl had written 6 months before he died. Grant had not opened the note again. He knew the first line by memory. Nephew, running is only leaving if your soul agrees to follow. Earl had always written like a man giving directions to a mule. Grant shifted in the seat as the road bent around a frozen shoulder of rock. Pain pulsed under his right knee, steady and familiar. The injury was old, collected in a place no map would name and no polite conversation had ever survived. Some nights it was only pain. Some nights it was a door. Rotor wash, green light, a teammate named Mason Ward laughing once before the laugh vanished into smoke. Grant tightened his hand on the steering wheel until the leather cover creaked. Not now. The red truck climbed slowly through the white. Silver Ridge Pass had once been a logging road before the county paved it just well enough to pretend responsibility. In summer, tourists called it beautiful. In winter, locals called it by other names and checked their fuel gauges twice. Grant passed the last mailbox, then the old cattle gate half buried on the left. After that, there were no houses, only pines, rock, snow, and the long gray road leading toward the Mercer cabin. Then something moved ahead. Grant's foot eased off the gas. At first, he thought it was a branch falling from the trees, a dark shape sliding out of the storm near the shoulder. Then the shape lifted its head. The dog stood beside the road, not in the road, not far enough from it to be safe. A German shepherd, large, male, and terribly thin. His sable coat was clotted with ice, black along the back and shoulders, tan through the legs, cream at the chest where the fur should have been thick but hung in wet, dirty ropes. Snow had gathered along his spine and ears until he looked half-made from the storm itself. One ear stood straight, the other had a torn edge near the tip. His ribs showed when he breathed. His front left paw hovered slightly above the ground, as if the earth had become too painful to trust. In his mouth he held a towel. Brown once, maybe gray. It was frozen stiff at the corners and darkened through the middle with blood. Grant stopped the truck in the center of the road. The old Ford idled rough beneath him. Snow clicked against the windshield. The dog did not run. That was the first wrong thing. A stray dog on a mountain road should have vanished at the sound of brakes. A starving animal should have lowered itself, begged, barked, or bolted. This dog did none of those things. He stood there with the blood-stained towel in his jaws and watched Grant through the snow with amber eyes too clear for an animal that close to collapse. Grant turned off the engine. The sudden silence entered the cab like cold water. He looked into the rearview mirror first. Habit. Then the side mirror. Then the tree line. Nothing. Only pines. Only snow. Only the feeling that the road had become aware of him. Easy, Grant said, though the dog could not hear him through the glass. He opened the door. Wind came in hard, carrying snow across his boots and into the cab. His knee complained when he stepped down. He ignored it. The dog shifted backward one careful step, the injured paw still lifted, but kept the towel in his mouth. Grant closed the truck door without slamming it. "Not here to hurt you," he said. His voice sounded rough from disuse. He had spoken to gas station clerks, lawyers, and mechanics in the last week. That was not the same as speaking to something that might understand fear better than language. The German shepherd's lips tightened around the towel. A low sound moved in his chest, not quite a growl, not quite warning enough to be rude. It was the sound of an animal who had already learned that help often arrived wearing hands. Grant stopped 6 yards away. He had seen that look before. Not in dogs only. In men pulled from blast sites who refused morphine because sleep felt too much like surrender. In civilians at checkpoints who knew safety could change uniforms by morning. In himself, reflected once in a dark hospital window after a doctor said the word trauma like it belonged in a chart instead of under the skin. "Fair," Grant said quietly. "I would not trust me either." The dog's eyes flicked to the trees behind him, not toward Grant, not toward the truck, toward the woods. Grant followed the glance. The pines beyond the road leaned close together, their trunks black and wet, their lower branches heavy with snow. The land dropped there into a shallow cut that vanished behind a ridge. No trail marker stood nearby, no fresh tire tracks crossed the shoulder except Grant's own. Then he saw something else. Far back between two pines, where the snow thickened into blue shadow, a black SUV sat half-hidden off the logging spur. No lights, no motion. The vehicle was angled behind the trees like it had backed there in a hurry. Its windshield was glazed with snow, but not enough to hide the square shape of it. The windows were too dark to see through. Grant stared. The dog stared with him. A second later, blowing snow swallowed the view. Grant blinked against the wind, looked again, and the SUV was gone. Not moved. Gone. Only tire ruts remained faintly visible near the timberline, already filling in. Grant felt the old part of himself wake under his ribs, the part that counted exits, the part that measured distance, the part that knew coincidence was often what danger called itself before introductions. He turned back to the dog. The German shepherd had lowered his head. The towel hung from his mouth, heavy with blood and meltwater. Now that Grant was closer, he could see the raw mark around the dog's neck, a rubbed circle beneath the fur. Not from a collar fitted by someone who cared. From rope. Maybe chain. Something tight enough to burn the skin and short enough to teach a body the limits of hope. Grant took one step. The dog backed up. Grant stopped. "I know," he said. "I see it." The dog's injured paw trembled. His ribs moved in shallow pulls. Ice had formed in the fur around his chest. Blood marked the snow beneath him in small dots, not pouring, but recent enough to matter. Grant slowly lowered himself into a crouch. The old scar in his knee pulled tight and bright. He kept his hands open, palms visible. The dog watched every inch. "I have water," Grant said. "Blanket. Jerky, too, but I'm guessing you would judge me for calling that food." The dog did not blink. That almost made Grant smile. Almost. Then the wind shifted, flattening the towel against the dog's chest. For the first time, Grant saw words stitched into the fabric. Faded blue thread, half hidden by blood. Elk Hollow Rescue Cabin. The name hit harder than it should have. Grant looked up. Earl had said those words before. Years ago, in the middle of one of his long phone messages Grant used to delete before the end. "Elk Hollow needs a new stovepipe. Elk Hollow saved 2 hunters last winter. Elk Hollow is not pretty, but neither is freezing to death." Grant had imagined an old shack, one of Earl's projects, another stubborn mercy no one had asked him to keep alive. He had not imagined a starving German shepherd in the road carrying its name in blood. The dog turned his head toward the woods again. This time he did not merely glance. He pointed with his whole body. The movement was weak but deliberate, a soldier indicating a door, a witness refusing to repeat himself, a creature with no patience left for human delay. Grant stood slowly. The dog backed toward the tree line, one step, then another. He kept his eyes on Grant until his rear paws touched the edge of the snowbank. Then he lowered his head and placed the towel on the road. Not dropped, placed at Grant's feet. The brown cloth landed with a soft, frozen slap against the packed snow. The German shepherd looked at him once more. Amber eyes, torn ear, chain-burned neck, a body nearly broken, still insisting on one more duty. Then he turned and ran into the pine woods. Not fast. He could not be fast. His injured paw made each stride uneven, but he moved with purpose, disappearing between the trees as the storm closed around him. Grant stood in the road with the blood-stained towel at his boots. Behind him, the red truck idled no more. Ahead of him, the dog's paw prints led into the dark timber, filling slowly with snow. He looked once toward the place where the black SUV had been. Then he bent, picked up the towel, and felt the stiff cloth crack in his hand. Elk Hollow Rescue Cabin. Grant Mercer had come to Silver Ridge to sell what was left of his family and leave before grief learned his address. Instead, a starving dog had brought him a warning in its mouth. Grant walked back to the truck, opened the door, took his flashlight from the glove box, and tucked Earl's unopened note into the inside pocket of his jacket. Then he faced the woods. The paw prints were already fading. Grant stepped off the road and followed them into the storm. Grant Mercer followed the paw prints into the pines with the blood-stained towel tucked inside his jacket and the flashlight held low in his right hand. The storm did not welcome him. Snow moved sideways between the trunks, striking his face in hard, dry grains, then softening at once against the heat of his skin. Behind him, the red pickup had vanished behind the bend and the curtain of white, leaving only the weak memory of its shape in the road. Ahead, the German Shepherd's tracks cut through the snow in a crooked line, one deep print, one shallow, one dragged mark where the injured front paw could not hold full weight. The dog was not running blind. That became clear after the first 100 yards. He avoided open ground. He moved around fallen branches before Grant saw them. Twice the tracks curved away from smooth white patches where snow had covered old drainage cuts, and Grant stopped each time, shining the beam down into darkness that would have swallowed a careless boot. The animal knew the mountain. Not like a lost stray, like someone who had once belonged to its dangerous places and had paid for that knowledge in pain. Grant's knee burned as the slope steepened. He kept moving. Pain had its own language, and he had long ago learned which parts of it were warnings and which were merely old ghosts asking to be noticed. The woods smelled of pine sap, wet bark, and cold earth hidden under snow. Somewhere above, a branch cracked under weight and dropped its burden with a soft thump. Grant froze, turned off the flashlight, and listened. Nothing followed him, or nothing honest enough to make sound. He waited 5 seconds longer than comfort wanted, then turned the light back on. The tracks led down into a narrow hollow where the wind softened, as if the mountain had cupped one hand around the place. At the bottom stood a cabin. Elk Hollow Rescue Cabin was smaller than Grant expected and sadder than anything Earl Mercer would have tolerated. It sat beneath a shoulder of black rock built from dark logs and patched boards, its steep roof holding a thick white cap of snow. A crooked metal chimney leaned out of the roofline like a finger trying to point at heaven but losing strength halfway. An old wooden sign hung above the door, half torn from one chain. The letters were still visible under ice. Elk Hollow Rescue Cabin. Someone had scratched through the word rescue with a knife. Grant stood at the edge of the trees and felt something inside him grow still. Earl had not built pretty things. He had built useful things. Fences that held, sheds that did not flatter themselves, shelves that could carry weight. If he had kept this place stocked, he would have done it with the same stubborn care he gave to everything that might help another person stay alive. The broken sign looked less like vandalism and more like an insult left for a dead man. The German Shepherd stood near the cabin's side wall, half in shadow, snow crusted along his back. He had been waiting. His amber eyes caught the flashlight and reflected it without warmth. He did not come to Grant. He turned his head once toward the door, then toward the rear wall, then back to Grant with the weary impatience of a guide dealing with the slowest member of the rescue party. "Still judging me," Grant said. The dog's torn ear twitched. The cabin door had been pried open, not by weather. The frame was split near the latch, and fresh scars showed pale under the old gray wood. Grant crouched, ran a gloved finger along the broken edge, and found the cut too clean for rot. Metal tool, recent enough that the exposed wood had not darkened. He pushed the door with his boot. It swung inward with a tired groan. Cold air came out. Not the clean cold of an empty room. This was the sour, dead cold of a place that had been opened and emptied by hands that did not intend to return anything. Grant stepped inside. His flashlight moved over bare shelves, a broken stove, a table tipped on one side, and a radio unit smashed against the far wall. The emergency cabinet beside the door hung open. Its glass had been knocked out, a Red Cross sticker peeled from one corner. No blankets, no canned food, no batteries, no medical kit, no matches in jars, though the rings of dust on the shelf showed where they had once stood. Someone had taken not only what was useful, but what proved usefulness had existed. That made Grant angrier than the damage. Theft was one thing, erasure was another. On the floor near the stove lay a dark stain shaped like a dragged hand. Grant lowered the flashlight. Blood, old enough to have browned, recent enough that the edges had not fully disappeared into the grain. Beside it lay 3 links of chain and a broken swivel hook, cheap metal, bright where it had snapped. He did not touch it at first. His hand closed once and opened again. The shepherd came to the doorway but did not cross the threshold. His body trembled lightly, not from cold alone. His muzzle lowered, his eyes fixed on the chain, then on the back wall of the cabin. Grant understood that look too late and all at once. "You were held here." The dog showed no answer a human could call yes. He simply stood there, ribs moving under wet fur, the torn towel no longer in his mouth, his silence more exact than speech. Grant took photographs with his phone, the broken latch, the empty shelves, the smashed radio, the blood, the chain. Not because he trusted anyone yet, but because evidence had a better memory than grief. Then he searched the room slowly, careful not to disturb more than necessary. Earl would have hidden something here if he thought the place was in danger. Earl had hidden spare keys under rocks, cash inside coffee tins, and once, during Grant's teenage summer, a shotgun cleaning kit inside a flour sack because, as he said, thieves had imagination, but rarely patience. The shepherd moved then. He limped around the outside of the cabin and stopped beneath a short rear window boarded from within. Grant followed him through knee-deep snow. The dog lowered his nose to the wall, then scraped once at the snow near the foundation. "Under there?" The dog backed away. Grant cleared snow with his gloved hands until his fingers struck wood. A loose exterior board, newer than the rest, nailed low and fast. He took the multi-tool from his pocket and worked the edge under the board. It resisted, then gave with a splintering sigh. Behind it, tucked into a space between log and stone, sat a flat metal box wrapped in oilcloth. Grant carried it inside and set it on the table. The shepherd finally crossed the doorway. Only 2 steps. No more. Enough to see the box. Grant unwrapped it. Inside lay a small notebook with a black cover, 3 photographs, and a folded map sealed in a plastic sleeve. The notebook smelled faintly of cedar, smoke, and the dry tobacco Earl had never admitted chewing. Grant opened the first page. Earl Mercer's handwriting filled it in hard, square letters. Elk Hollow inventory. Winter rotation. Check twice before first heavy snow. Leave more than you take. If you use the last match, you were raised wrong. Grant swallowed against something that was not quite laughter and not quite grief. The photographs were old. One showed Earl standing outside the cabin in a heavy coat, white hair flattened under a wool cap, one hand lifted in irritation at whoever held the camera. Beside him sat the same German shepherd, healthier then, thicker through the chest, ears sharp, eyes bright with professional distrust. The dog wore no smile. Some animals did not waste expressions on photographers. On the back, Earl had written, "Ruger. Found him near the pass. He decided I needed supervision." Grant looked toward the shepherd. "Ruger." The dog's torn ear lifted. Not much. Enough. Before Grant could read further, his phone buzzed with one weak bar of service. The screen showed the call he had placed 10 minutes earlier from the ridge, when he had realized the dog's wounds were worse than the storm. Animal Rescue had not answered. The county office had given him a number for a mobile veterinarian out of Silver Ridge. Now that number called back. "This is Dr. Leah Carter," a woman said when Grant answered. Her voice was low, brisk, and weathered by too many emergencies handled without enough hands. "You reported an injured German Shepherd near Elk Hollow?" "I found him," Grant said. "Or he found me." "That sounds like a shepherd." "He has chain wounds, possible frostbite, front leg injury, malnutrition. He led me to the old rescue cabin." There was a pause. Not confusion, recognition. "Is there a torn edge on the left ear?" she asked. Grant looked at Ruger. "Yes." Leah exhaled once, carefully. "I am on my way." She arrived 40 minutes later on a snowmobile pulling a small covered sled, her headlamp cutting through the storm before her face appeared. Dr. Leah Carter was 41, tall and lean, with short chestnut hair tucked under a gray knit cap and the long face made sharper by tiredness rather than age. Her eyes were hazel, steady, and almost stern until she looked at an animal. Then something in them softened without becoming sentimental. She wore a dark insulated coat patched at both elbows, heavy boots, and a red medical bag strapped across her back. Grant guessed she was the kind of woman who did not comfort people before the work was done and rarely needed to raise her voice because competence had its own volume. She stopped 10 feet from Ruger and lowered herself slowly into the snow. "Well," she said to the dog, not to Grant, "you look offended to still be alive." Ruger stared at her. Leah smiled faintly. "I remember." Grant looked between them. "You know him?" "I treated him years ago. Earl Mercer brought him in after a trap injury. Said the dog was not his, then paid the bill before I finished arguing. Earl did that with animals and people. Blamed nothing. Cared anyway." She did not reach for Ruger. She set her bag down, opened it, and waited while the dog read the room. When he finally allowed her near enough to examine him, she moved with patient hands. She found the raw neck wound, swelling around the shoulder, torn pads, hunger, and exhaustion. Her mouth tightened only once when her fingers brushed the chain mark. "This was not weather," she said. "I know." "No," Leah said, glancing at the empty shelves and broken radio. "I mean, all of it." Grant opened Earl's notebook again while Leah wrapped Ruger's injured paw. The later pages were different. Less inventory, more concern. Missing blankets, radio batteries gone twice. North trail marker moved. County does not return calls. Men from Aspen Crown seen near Service Road. They want Elk Hollow declared inactive before spring review. Aspen Crown Lodge. Grant had seen the name on a glossy buyer's letter in the estate folder. Mountain access, private cabins, responsible development, community renewal. Clean words arranged like fresh snow over buried wire. He turned another page. Earl had drawn the valley in rough lines, marking old rescue routes, winter shelters, avalanche cuts, and one proposed road in red pencil. The proposed road ran straight through the land around Elk Hollow. Leah saw the map and went very still. "They told people this cabin was abandoned," she said. Grant looked at the smashed radio, the empty shelves, the blood on the floor. "It was not abandoned," he said. "No," Leah answered. "It was emptied." Ruger rose despite her unfinished bandage and limped to the rear wall inside the cabin. He stood there shivering, nose close to the boards as if the wall itself had one more thing to say. Grant turned to the last page of Earl's notebook. There were only 2 lines, written harder than the rest. "If Ruger comes back with the towel, they came back. Trust the dog before you trust the men who call this progress." Grant Mercer brought Ruger down from Elk Hollow after the storm had thickened into something with weight and intention. The dog did not ride in the cab. Leah Carter tried once to guide him toward the passenger side with a blanket held open and her voice lowered into that careful tone she used for injured animals and stubborn men. But Ruger looked at the open door as if it were a trap with upholstery. So Grant lowered the tailgate of the red pickup. Ruger studied the truck bed, the folded tarp, the old toolbox, and the snow gathering along the metal ribs. Then he climbed in on his own, awkward and limping, refusing help with such quiet authority that Leah only shook her head. "Of course," she said. "A patient with opinions." Grant did not smile, but something in his face came close. The road back to Earl Mercer's cabin was slow and ugly. Snow pushed against the windshield. The old Ford groaned around every bend. In the mirror, Grant could see Ruger braced in the truck bed, his sable coat rimmed white, his torn ear flattened against the wind, his body angled toward the mountain behind them as if part of him had not agreed to leave Elk Hollow at all. Earl's cabin waited at the lower edge of Silver Ridge, tucked between dark pines and a frozen creek that moved under ice with a sound like careful breathing. It was a square-built place of rough logs, a steep tin roof, and a porch that sagged slightly on the left side. Earl had painted the front door blue years ago, badly, with brush marks still visible and one drip hardened near the handle. He had said a bright door helped lost people trust a house in bad weather. Grant had thought that was sentimental nonsense when he was 20. Now, with Ruger bleeding through a bandage in the truck bed, it did not seem foolish. Inside, the cabin smelled of cedar smoke, dust, old coffee, and the kind of silence left behind by a man who had gone out one day, expecting to come back. Earl's wool coat still hung by the door. A stack of firewood stood beside the stove. A chipped mug sat upside down near the sink. On the wall above the table was a faded photograph of Earl Mercer in his younger days, lean and sharp-eyed, wearing a road crew jacket and the expression of a man already disappointed in unnecessary conversation. Leah entered first with her red medical bag. She moved through the cabin with practical eyes, taking in the stove, the cleanest corner of the floor, the water bucket, the towels, the exits. She was not tall enough to look imposing and not soft enough to be mistaken for delicate. At 41, she carried herself like a woman who had spent years driving bad roads to barns where animals and people both waited too long to ask for help. Her kindness did not flutter. It worked. "Warm water," she said. "Not hot, a clean bowl. Any old sheets?" Grant pointed toward the hall. "Linen closet." "You have one?" "Earl called it that. It is a shelf with delusions." Leah went to work. Grant built the stove fire with hands that knew the motions but not the comfort. Flame caught under kindling and crawled upward, small at first, then steady. Ruger stood near the closed front door, refusing the rug, refusing the blanket, refusing the room's invitation to rest. His ribs showed through the wet fur. His neck wound looked worse in the lamplight, a raw, angry ring where rope or chain had burned through hair and skin. His left front paw was swollen, wrapped now but still held slightly off the floor. When Leah reached toward his collar line, Ruger's lips lifted. Grant moved without thinking. Leah held up one hand without looking at him. "Do not rescue him from the exam unless he asks you to." "He is asking." "No," she said. "He is warning me that he remembers hands. That is different." The words hit Grant in a place he did not have a name for. He stopped. Ruger watched him, amber eyes bright in the firelight, then lowered his lip by half an inch. Leah did not touch his neck again. She cleaned what he allowed, wrapped what she could, left what required trust for later. That, Grant thought, was the first honest medicine the dog had been given in a long time. Afterward, Ruger drank from a metal bowl near the stove. He did it only when Grant turned his back. The sound was faint, almost ashamed, tongue against water, life entering the room in small, stubborn measures. Then the shepherd took 3 slow steps and lay down near the front door facing it. Not asleep. Never quite asleep. a guard posted by his own decision. Grant set the blood-stained towel on the kitchen table. Ruger's head rose at once. The change was immediate. Not panic, not aggression. Recognition. His body tensed. His injured paw pressed against the floor despite the pain. His eyes moved from the towel to the north-facing window where the mountains were only darkness and snow. Grant took his hand away from the cloth. "Easy," he said. "I am not taking it back up there tonight." Ruger did not believe him, but he lay down again. Leah noticed. She noticed everything. That towel means something to him. It says Elk Hollow. It probably means more than the words. Grant opened Earl's black notebook on the table. The early pages were inventories and weather notes, written with Earl's square, hard hand. Blankets restocked, stovepipe patched, north marker reset after wind. 2 hunters sheltered overnight. Child from church group found half-mile below East Ridge. Left extra socks because boys never dress for the mountain they imagine. The plainness made Grant's throat tighten. Earl had not written like a hero. He had written like a man keeping receipts for mercy. A loose newspaper clipping slipped from between 2 pages. Grant unfolded it. The photograph showed a younger man standing beside Earl outside Elk Hollow in a winter coat too expensive for the backcountry. The man was perhaps 35 then, tall, handsome, with pale hair swept back from a smooth forehead and a smile that understood cameras. One hand rested on Earl's shoulder in a gesture that seemed grateful, until Grant looked longer and saw possession in the angle of it. The caption read, "Local developer rescued after whiteout near Silver Ridge Pass. Calvin Pierce thanks volunteer Earl Mercer after being sheltered overnight at Elk Hollow Rescue Cabin." Leah leaned over the table. "Calvin Pierce." Grant looked at her. "You know him?" "Everyone in Silver Ridge knows Calvin." Leah's mouth flattened. "Owner of Aspen Crown Lodge. Polished boots, clean gloves, big promises. He can remember the name of a waitress's child and still step over the waitress if she is in the way of a permit." Grant studied the clipping again. Calvin Pierce looked like a man who knew gratitude could be useful if kept on paper and never allowed to become debt. Earl had written beneath the clipping in pencil. "Saved his life in 2009. He shook my hand with both of his. Men who use both hands often want one of yours busy." Grant turned the page. The next section of the notebook had changed tone. Earl's humor remained, but something harder had entered the lines. "Aspen Crown survey crews near East Service Route. County says Elk Hollow inactive on 3 maps. Lie. Blankets missing again. No storm damage. Human damage. Radio batteries gone. Door forced. Someone wants an empty cabin photographed." Grant read slowly, each sentence laying another board across a hole he had not known was there. Earl had documented everything. Dates, weather, missing supplies, names of county clerks who took reports and never called back, a copy number for a complaint sent to the land office, a note saying the file vanished. Leah sat across from him, silent now. Outside, the storm pressed its face to the windows. A knock came at the door. Ruger was on his feet before the second knock landed. No bark, no drama. Just a silent rise, head low, body between the table and the entrance. Grant stood, one hand low at his side. Leah closed the notebook without being asked. The woman on the porch was elderly but not fragile in the way people expected. Martha Quinn was 70, short and narrow, with silver hair pinned at the back of her head and a face lined by weather, worry, and many years of hearing bad news before anyone else. She wore a dark wool coat buttoned unevenly, brown boots, and a knitted scarf the color of old moss. Her eyes were pale green and restless. She looked like a woman who had spent most of her life being useful, then one winter discovered usefulness and courage were not the same thing. "Grant Mercer?" she asked. "Yes." "I am Martha Quinn. I used to work dispatch for County Rescue." Her gaze moved past him to the dog, color drained from her face. "Oh, Lord, that is him." Ruger stared at her. Martha gripped the porch rail as if the cabin had tilted. Grant opened the door wider. "You knew Earl?" "Everybody knew Earl," she swallowed. "Not everybody did right by him." Inside, Martha refused coffee with a small shake of her head, then accepted it when Leah put the mug in her hands anyway. She sat at the table, but only on the edge of the chair, as if she did not intend to stay long enough to be forgiven. Her fingers trembled around the cup. "I received Earl's last call," she said. The stove clicked softly. Grant did not move. Martha looked at the towel on the table and closed her eyes for 1 second. "It was during a storm, late. He called from Elk Hollow. Said someone had forced the door, supplies gone, radio damaged, North Trail sign moved down toward the ravine." Her voice thinned, but did not break. "Then he said there was a dog chained behind the cabin, would not leave, hurt, maybe, angry enough to still be alive." Ruger's torn ear lifted. Grant's hand tightened on the back of the chair. "What happened to the report?" Martha stared into the coffee like it could answer for her. "My supervisor told me to mark it as routine inspection, weather concern, no emergency. He said Aspen Crown had county people nervous and Earl was making trouble again. He said one old man's stubbornness could not be allowed to threaten jobs." "Who was the supervisor?" Martha's lips pressed together. Fear crossed her face, old but still trained. Grant saw it and understood that some chains did not leave marks on the neck. "I changed the record," she said. "That is the truth I came to say tonight. Earl reported sabotage, and I helped bury it because I was afraid." No one comforted her. That was good. Comfort given too early could become another kind of hiding. Martha reached into her coat pocket and took out a small cassette tape in a cracked plastic case. A strip of masking tape was stuck across the front. "Earl, final call," handwritten in faded ink. She placed it on the table beside the towel. Grant looked at it but did not touch it. Martha's eyes filled, yet her voice steadied at last. "There is a part I never gave anyone," she said. "Your uncle named the man behind it." The cassette player came from the bottom drawer of Earl Mercer's desk, wrapped in a grocery bag and tied with a shoelace, as if Earl had expected even old machines to wander off if not properly warned. Grant found it beneath road maps, spare batteries, a rusted compass, and a stack of unpaid county notices that Earl had answered in pencil across the margins. The cabin had gone quiet around the table. Leah Carter sat with her hands folded near her medical bag, her posture straight but tired, the lamplight cutting sharp lines along her cheekbones. Martha Quinn sat opposite her, small inside her dark coat, both hands around a coffee mug she had not lifted for 10 minutes. Ruger lay near the front door with his head on his paws, eyes open, body facing the room, but ears aimed toward the mountains. Grant set the cassette into the player. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the room filled with wind. Not the wind outside the cabin, but older wind, thin, torn, running through static. A radio signal fighting weather and losing ground by inches. Martha closed her eyes. A voice came through. "County Dispatch, this is Earl Mercer at Elk Hollow. Door's been forced, supplies missing, radio cabinet opened, north marker turned toward the cut." Grant's hand tightened on the table. Earl's voice was rougher than Grant remembered, dragged raw by cold, but the shape of it was the same. Dry, stubborn, unwilling to dress fear in nicer clothes. Static cracked, then Earl again. "This is not storm damage. Tell the land office that. Tell Sheriff Bowden if he still answers to a badge and not a lunch invitation." Leah looked down. Martha's lips trembled once. The tape hissed, then caught. There's a dog chained behind the shelter, German Shepherd, hurt bad, would not leave the wall. Whoever tied him there wanted him quiet or dead. Maybe both. Ruger rose. No one touched him. The dog stood very still, amber eyes fixed on the cassette player. His torn ear lifted. His bandaged paw pressed against the floor, and pain passed through him visibly, but he did not sit again. Then Earl's voice dropped lower, fighting static. Calvin Pierce is not trying to build a lodge around Elk Hollow. He is trying to bury Elk Hollow under one. Dale Hargrove has men moving supplies through the East Road. They want photographs of an empty, broken shelter before the hearing. If I do not get back down, make sure Grant knows. The tape snapped into a blank hiss. Martha flinched as though someone had slapped the table. Grant waited. The hiss stretched on. Then Earl returned, distant now, almost swallowed. Do not let anger do their work for them. Truth steady, hands open. Bring the dog home if he lets you. The tape clicked off. The silence afterward had weight. Grant did not move for several seconds. He could feel the old red heat waking in him, the part that wanted a target with a face, a room with one door, a problem simple enough to put through a wall. The name Dale Hargrove sat in his mind like a nail under a boot. Leah saw it. She had that gift, or curse, of seeing the thing people tried to keep behind the face. Grant, she said quietly. I heard him. I know you did. That man tied Ruger behind the shelter. Maybe, Leah said. Maybe one of his men did. Maybe he ordered it. Maybe he watched. Evidence first. Grant looked at her. She did not look away. It was irritating how much steadiness could resemble command. Martha wiped beneath one eye with her thumb and set the mug down. Dale Hargrove used to be a deputy in Mesa County. Not a good one, not bad enough to go to prison, just bad enough to understand where the lines were and how to lean on them without crossing in daylight. Grant turned toward her. Martha swallowed. He runs security for Aspen Crown now. Big shoulders, black SUV. Talks soft when he is threatening people. Makes it sound like he is giving advice. Grant saw again the dark vehicle between the pines, half hidden behind the timberline. He was watching the road. Martha looked older in that moment. Then he knows Ruger found you. They began laying out the evidence because movement was safer than thought. Grant printed the photographs from his phone on Earl's old portable printer after fighting with the cable for 15 minutes and losing with dignity only once. Leah wrote a formal veterinary statement in clean, hard letters. Chain pressure trauma, malnutrition, torn pads, defensive behavior consistent with cruelty and restraint. Martha wrote down the original content of Earl's call from memory before fear could soften it a second time. On the table, they placed Earl's notebook, the old photographs of Elk Hollow, the map with rescue routes, the blood-stained towel, the broken chain sealed in a freezer bag, Leah's report, Martha's statement, and the cassette tape. It did not look like victory. It looked small. Paper, metal, cloth, ink. But Grant had learned that wars rarely ended with one heroic thing. More often they turned on small objects placed in the right order before a person brave enough to read them. Near dusk, his phone buzzed. Unknown number. Grant looked at Leah. Leah looked at Martha. Ruger lifted his head before the phone rang a second time. Grant answered without speaking. A man breathed on the other end, rough and close, as if he had run before making the call. Is this Grant Mercer? Yes. My name is Owen Miller. I drive tow and freight out of Silver Ridge. The man's voice was low, strained, and carrying the gravelly fatigue of someone who smoked too much and slept too little. I do not have long. Then start with the part that matters. A bitter sound came through, not laughter, something too tired for that. You really are Earl's kin. Grant waited. I hauled supplies out of Elk Hollow, Owen said. Blankets, radio batteries, first aid kits, canned food, propane bottles, medical tins. They told me it was county relocation, said the shelter was being decommissioned, temporary storage at Aspen Crown. Leah reached for a pen. Grant put the call on speaker. Owen Miller kept talking. I am 48 years old, 6 feet, if my back is kind, built like a man who lost an argument with every engine he ever fixed. I got a daughter in Pueblo who does not call much, and a towing business one missed payment from becoming somebody else's equipment. That is not an excuse. It is just the little lie I used while I was doing the wrong thing. Martha closed her eyes again. Grant's voice stayed flat. Why call now? Because I saw that dog once behind Dale Hargrove's maintenance shed. Bloody muzzle, chain on him. Dale said the animal attacked workers, said it was being handled. I believed him because believing him meant I could keep driving and get paid. Ruger stood. Owen heard the movement somehow, or maybe guilt did. His voice dropped. Is he alive? Yes. The man exhaled shakily. Good. That is more mercy than I earned. You kept records? A pause. Yes. Receipts. Gate logs. 2 fuel slips with Aspen Crown job numbers. A warehouse form Dale signed without reading because men like him assume scared people stay scared. Where are they? Safe enough for tonight. Not safe enough for long. Owen's breathing changed. Dale knows Martha talked. He came by my yard this afternoon asking whether I had seen you. He smiled the whole time. Grant looked toward the window. Snow had softened the edges of the yard. The pines beyond the porch were dark, packed tight with evening. Owen, Grant said, do not come here if you are being followed. I am not coming there, not yet. I will leave copies where Earl used to keep salt for the county plows. Ask Martha, she knows. Martha nodded quickly, face pale. The line crackled. Then Owen added, Mr. Mercer? Yes. Do not underestimate Dale because Calvin wears the better coat. The call ended. No one spoke. Then headlights slid across the front window, slow, white, deliberate. Ruger moved between the table and the door before Grant rose from his chair. The engine outside idled smooth and expensive. Not a work truck, not a county plow. Through the curtains, Grant saw the black SUV roll to a stop beside the red pickup. Snow shone on its hood. Its windows were dark as river ice. The driver's door opened. Dale Hargrove stepped out. He was in his early 50s, tall and thick through the chest, with a neck that seemed to start at his ears and a square face shaved so clean it looked polished. His hair was iron gray, cut close, his eyes a pale, washed blue that gave nothing away. He wore a black winter jacket without a speck of mud on it, dark gloves, and boots too clean for any man who had been near a mountain road that day. His manner, even walking across the yard, was calm, almost courteous. That made Grant dislike him before the knock. 3 taps, measured, not asking. Grant opened the door before Leah could object. Dale smiled. It was not a friendly smile. It was a tool laid gently on a table. Grant Mercer, he said. Dale Hargrove. I handle security coordination for Aspen Crown Lodge. I know who you are. Dale's eyes flicked past him to Leah, to Martha, to the evidence on the table, then to Ruger. The smile thinned. Well, he said, there is the famous dog. Ruger made no sound. His lips did not lift, he simply stared. Dale looked away first, but smoothly enough that most people would have missed it. I wanted to stop by before misunderstandings become expensive, Dale said. You are newly back in town, grieving, dealing with estate decisions. Your service record is respected, of course. Of course, Grant said. And complicated. Dale's voice softened. People know combat leaves marks. No shame in that. But county boards can become cautious when an emotionally burdened veteran starts accusing local employers based on old notebooks and an injured animal. Leah stood. Careful. Dale turned his smile on her. Dr. Carter. Still treating livestock like witnesses. Only when they tell the truth better than men. For the first time, something hard moved behind Dale's eyes. Martha's hands trembled around the cassette case, but she did not hide it. Dale noticed that too. You should sell the cabin, he said to Grant. Sell the acreage. Take a fair number. Leave Silver Ridge with your uncle's memory intact instead of dragging his last years through public mud. Earl was old. He saw enemies in paperwork. Happens. Grant stepped onto the porch, closing half the distance between them. Cold hit his face. His hands stayed open. Truth steady. Hands open. You came all the way through a storm to give real estate advice? I came because men like you sometimes mistake restraint for weakness. Dale's voice remained low, polite enough for court. A former SEAL with untreated stress, a dangerous German shepherd, a frightened, retired dispatcher, and a veterinarian with opinions. That story can be told several ways. Grant felt his pulse in his jaw. Behind him, Ruger shifted one paw against the floor. Dale lowered his voice further. Choose the version where you leave with money. Grant looked at the black SUV, then back at the man who had hidden it once among the pines. No. Dale studied him a moment longer. Then he smiled again, disappointed in a way that felt practiced. Earl was stubborn, too. He was right, too. Dale walked backward one step, still facing him. Right does not always win hearings. He returned to the SUV, climbed in, and reversed down the snowy drive without turning around. The headlights disappeared between the trees. Only then did Grant realize his fists were clenched. He opened them slowly. Leah came to the doorway. You did not swing? No. Good. Did not feel good. It rarely does. Night settled hard after that. Martha stayed only long enough to seal the cassette in a plastic bag and promised to retrieve Owen's copies at first light. Leah checked Ruger's bandage once more, then drove back toward town on the snowmobile, leaving extra medicine and a warning that pride was not a treatment plan. Grant sat beside the stove until the fire sank into coals. Ruger lay on the porch instead of inside, as if the cabin's warmth had become too personal. Grant let him. Some creatures accepted shelter only when no one called it surrender. Near midnight, Grant woke in the chair. He did not remember falling asleep. The room was dim, the stove breathed red, the front door stood slightly open. Grant was on his feet at once. Ruger! No answer. He stepped onto the porch barefoot before the cold convinced him to go back for boots. Snow blew under the roofline. The blanket Leah had left for the dog lay twisted near the steps. On the top plank, dark against the snow, was one fresh drop of blood. Grant crouched. Beyond the porch, Ruger's paw prints crossed the yard, past the red truck, and turned toward the mountain road, toward Elk Hollow, toward the storm. Grant stood slowly, the cold moving through him like a warning. Then he went inside for his boots, his coat, and the flashlight. Grant Mercer found Leah Carter already halfway out of her coat when he called, which told him two things. First, she had not gone to bed. Second, she had been waiting for the mountain to make another demand. Her answer came before he finished explaining the blood on the porch. I will meet you at Earl's place in 10 minutes, she said. Martha Quinn arrived before Leah did, driving an old white Subaru with one headlight dimmer than the other and a rosary swinging from the mirror. She had changed out of her dark coat into a heavier parka, but she still looked too small for the weather and too old for the kind of night Silver Ridge was becoming. Yet her face had hardened in a useful way. Fear still lived there, but it no longer had the only chair in the room. Owen Miller came last, in a tow truck that sounded like a coughing bear. In person, he looked exactly like his voice had promised. 48, broad through the shoulders, red-faced from wind and bad sleep, with a gray mustache, oil under his fingernails, and eyes that kept checking the road behind him. He wore a brown canvas coat with the name Miller Tow stitched crookedly over one pocket. Guilt had made him smaller than his body, but not useless. In the truck bed were rope, a pry bar, 2 thermal blankets, a shovel, a tow chain, and a canvas pouch stuffed with receipts. "I brought the copies," Owen said, handing Grant a plastic envelope, "and the things men bring when they are scared and trying to be practical." Grant took the envelope and tucked it inside his jacket with Earl's note. "Good enough." Leah checked the drop of blood on the porch, then followed Ruger's prints with her headlamp. "Fresh. Not a heavy bleed. He is moving on purpose." Martha looked toward the dark road climbing into the storm. "He is going back." Grant already knew it. Ruger's paw prints crossed the yard, past the red truck, and turned toward the mountain with a certainty that made the snow look like paper marked by command. The dog had not fled warmth. He had left it behind because something colder was calling. They went after him. The storm above Silver Ridge Pass had changed since evening. Earlier it had been snowfall. Now it was weather with intent. Wind moved low over the road, dragging loose snow across the surface in pale sheets that hid ice, rocks, and the edges of the ditch. Grant walked first with the flashlight angled down. Leah followed with her medical bag strapped across her shoulder. Martha kept both hands tucked beneath her arms, her breath coming short but steady. Owen came last, carrying rope and shovel, turning often to look behind them. "Expecting company?" Grant asked without turning. Owen gave a dry laugh. "No. That is why I keep looking." Ruger's tracks did not follow the main road for long. They cut toward an old service trail that ran between black pines and a line of frozen boulders. Grant recognized the route from Earl's map. It was a hard way up, narrow and mean, but safer than the open road when the wind turned blind. Ruger had chosen it as if he had read the notebook himself. Twice they lost the prints. Twice Ruger appeared ahead between the trees, gray and black and cream in the blowing snow, looking back with bright impatience. He did not bark. He did not wait long. His torn ear pointed toward the mountain, and then he vanished again. "He is leading us," Martha whispered. "He's been doing that since the road," Grant said. They found the snowmobile below a narrow cut in the slope. At first it looked like a dark stump half buried beneath a drift. Then Leah's headlamp caught the curved handlebar, the cracked windshield, and one red reflector blinking beneath snow. The machine had slid off the service trail and tipped hard against a pine, its back end lifted, one runner buried deep. A man's boot stuck out from under it. Leah moved first. She dropped to one knee and slid down the short slope with controlled urgency, not graceful but efficient. Grant followed, driving his boots into the snow to keep from falling. Owen swore softly and came after him with the shovel. The trapped man was young, maybe 26, with blonde hair plastered to his forehead beneath a cracked helmet and a face gone pale with cold. He was tall and narrow in a polished way, the kind of young man who had grown up in expensive jackets and had only recently learned that mountains did not read price tags. His blue eyes were glassy with pain. One leg was pinned beneath the snowmobile. His gloved hand still gripped a camera, as if the order that had sent him up there had remained stronger than sense until the crash. "Name?" Leah said, already pressing 2 fingers to his neck. "Tyler," he whispered. "Tyler Pierce." Owen stopped digging for half a second. Grant felt the name land. Pierce. Leah did not pause. That was why she was good. "Tyler, I am Dr. Carter. You are going to hold still and make no dramatic decisions. Can you feel your foot? I do not know. That is an unhelpful answer, but common in people pinned under machines. Tyler's eyes rolled toward Grant. Recognition struggled through pain. You are Mercer. Yes. My father said you were making trouble. Grant set his shoulder against the snowmobile. Your father has a limited vocabulary. Together they dug around the pinned runner. Owen used the shovel. Grant braced the machine. Leah kept Tyler alert with questions that sounded rude enough to keep him conscious. Martha stood above them with a flashlight trained steady on the work, her small hands locked around the beam like it was a lifeline. On 3, Grant said. Owen hooked the tow chain around the rear frame. Grant lifted. Owen pulled. The snowmobile shifted 6 inches, then slid enough for Leah to drag Tyler's leg free. The young man cried out once, sharp and ashamed. Good, Leah said. Pain means your body still wants to argue. They wrapped him in thermal blankets and checked for bleeding. His leg was not broken clean through, but badly bruised and possibly fractured. His camera strap had twisted around one arm. Grant removed the camera and saw the screen still glowing faintly. Images of Elk Hollow, broken door, empty shelves, smashed radio. A close shot of the sign with the word rescue scratched out. Grant looked at Tyler. The young man closed his eyes. I was told to document condition before the hearing. By who? Tyler's lips trembled from cold or truth. Dale. My father said the board needed to see the shelter was unsafe. Dale said to make sure the approach looked dangerous. Martha made a small sound. The sign. Tyler opened his eyes again, confused by guilt arriving late. I followed the marker. It pointed down toward the cut. I thought I missed the trail. You followed the trap they set for everyone else, Grant said. No one said more after that for a while. Rescue was work. Judgment could wait until a man was warm enough to survive it. Getting Tyler to Elk Hollow took nearly an hour. Grant and Owen supported him between them, each step dragging pain through the young man's body. Leah walked close, watching his color. Martha carried the camera and the evidence pouch beneath her coat. Ruger moved ahead, appearing at turns, then stopping long enough to make sure the slow humans had not lost the lesson. The cabin emerged from the snow like an accusation. Elk Hollow looked worse at night. The broken door shifted in the wind. The scratched sign creaked on its remaining chain. Snow had blown across the threshold, making the shelter seem abandoned to anyone who did not know how recently abandonment had been manufactured. Owen found enough wood scraps near the stove to start a poor fire. Grant cleaned the stove mouth, coaxed flame through the bad draft, and watched the shelter change by degrees. Not warm, not safe, not yet, but less dead. Leah set Tyler on the bench and examined his leg more carefully. Martha stood near the wall looking at Earl's empty shelves as if each bare space were a sentence she should have written correctly years ago. Tyler stared at the room. My father knew this place. Grant looked up from the stove. Tyler swallowed. He told me once. Not like a story, more like a joke he did not want to finish. Said some old shelter saved him before he learned how expensive land could become. Earl saved him, Martha said. Tyler nodded, eyes wet now, whether from cold or shame. He knew. He knew exactly what Elk Hollow was. But the VIP road would cut 10 minutes off the lodge route. 10 minutes. And a private access line across the pass. My father said people pay more when they feel the mountain belongs only to them. Owen looked at the empty shelves. And poor folks can freeze politely somewhere else. Tyler covered his face with one shaking hand. I did not know about the dog. I swear I did not. Dale called him a problem. Said there was an animal interfering with the work crews, a problem that needed handling. Ruger stood near the back wall. At the word problem, his body went rigid. Then he lowered his head and began to dig. Not at the floor, where Grant had found the chain. Not at the loose board. He dug at a pile of stones near the rear corner, half inside a broken gap where the wall met the slope. His bandaged paw scraped once, then slipped. He tried again, pain making his shoulders shake. "Stop," Leah said, moving toward him. Grant raised a hand. "Wait." Ruger looked at Grant, then at the stones. Grant took Owen's pry bar and knelt. The rocks were cold and wedged tight, but not natural. Someone had stacked them by hand to hide the hollow behind them. He worked one loose, then another. Owen helped, silent now. Behind the stones was a narrow cavity wrapped in old oilcloth. Inside lay a small metal tobacco box. Earl had smoked a pipe once, then quit when Grant was 12 because, as he put it, a man should only pay money to things that helped him live. The box still smelled faintly of ash and wintergreen. Grant opened it carefully. Inside was a thin, final journal, smaller than the black notebook, its pages water-stained but legible. A folded map marked, "Original Rescue Routes. Do not trust county revision," and a small wooden cross on a cord, worn smooth by years against skin. Grant knew the cross. Earl had worn it under his shirt, though he argued with pastors often enough to make church women pray harder. He used to say faith was not proven by how loud a man sang on Sunday, but by whether he brought firewood when nobody was watching. Grant held the cross in his palm. For a moment the room blurred. Leah looked away, giving him privacy without leaving him alone. Grant opened the final journal. Earl's last entries were shorter, the handwriting less steady. Aspen Crown pressure through county office. Calvin remembers 2009. Gratitude dies quick when money teaches it new words. Dale moving supplies. Hargrove knows old law enforcement tricks. Smiles before he corners people. Ruger stayed behind shelter, would not leave the wall. Good dog. Better judge of men than most men. If Grant ever comes home, tell him this. Do not let them make him into the weapon they need him to be. Truth steady, hands open. Bring the dog home if he lets you. Grant closed the journal. Ruger lowered himself near the door, trembling with exhaustion. No one spoke for a long time. Then Tyler whispered, "I will tell them." Grant looked at him. "My father, Dale, the photos, why I was sent up here." Tyler's face twisted. "I cannot undo it. But I can tell them." Martha's voice was quiet. "Telling is where some people finally begin." They prepared to move down before the storm worsened. Leah splinted Tyler's leg with boards from a broken shelf. Owen rigged rope support. Grant packed Earl's final journal, the original map, and the wooden cross inside his jacket. Ruger refused to be carried. He limped ahead of them, slower now, but still first. The descent was harder. The wind had erased parts of their earlier trail. Tyler groaned with every slip. Twice Martha nearly fell, and Owen caught her with one big hand under her elbow. Nobody thanked anybody. The mountain charged for conversation. They were halfway to the lower road when headlights appeared below. Two white beams cut through the storm and held still across the narrow track. Grant stopped. The black SUV sat sideways between the snowbanks, blocking the way down. The driver's door stood open. Dale Hargrove stood in front of the headlights with his black jacket dusted white, his face calm, and one gloved hand hanging low at his side. Something metal caught the light there. A seatbelt cutter. Maybe a rescue tool. Maybe a knife with a polite name. Ruger moved before Grant did. The German shepherd stepped ahead on his injured paw, placing himself between Grant and Dale, His torn ear lifted, his black saddle bristling under the snow. He did not bark. He simply stood there, thin, wounded, and unwilling to move aside. Morning came to Silver Ridge with a hard, blue cold and no mercy for tired men. Grant Mercer had slept less than 1 hour, if the thing in the chair beside Earl's stove could be called sleep. It had been more like falling through dark water and waking before his lungs decided whether to breathe. By dawn, the storm had weakened, but it had not apologized. Snow clung to the pines, buried fence rails, and turned every roof in town into a white, silent confession. The county building stood at the end of Main Street, a square brick structure with narrow windows, a flag snapping stiffly in the wind, and a set of concrete steps polished by decades of boots. On most days, it handled marriage licenses, property disputes, snowplow complaints, and the small paperwork griefs of mountain life. That morning, it held the future of Elk Hollow Rescue Cabin. Grant parked the red Ford across the street. He sat behind the wheel for a moment with both hands resting on the cracked steering wheel cover. Earl's final journal lay inside his jacket. The cassette tape, chain links, old maps, photographs, towel, Owen's receipts, Leah's report, Martha's corrected statement, and Tyler Pierce's camera card sat in a weatherproof document case on the passenger seat. It did not look like enough. Truth rarely did before it was spoken. Grant wore a clean dark shirt beneath his worn green field jacket. He had considered wearing his old Navy dress uniform for exactly 12 seconds, then left it folded in the duffel at Earl's cabin. A uniform would have made people look at service. He needed them to look at evidence. Leah Carter waited near the entrance with Ruger beside her. Ruger had refused a leash again. Leah had settled for walking with a soft lead folded uselessly in her gloved hand, as if carrying the idea of control might satisfy county rules. The German shepherd looked worse in daylight than Grant wanted him to look, and better than Death had expected him to. His sable coat had dried unevenly, his cream chest still thin beneath the fur, and the raw mark around his neck had been covered with a clean bandage. His torn ear stood at an angle of permanent judgment. He leaned slightly off the injured paw, but his amber eyes were clear. "He stays outside the hearing room," Grant said. Leah nodded. "Good." Martha Quinn came up the steps behind them. She wore a navy coat buttoned straight this time, silver hair pinned tight, and no scarf to hide behind. The cassette case was in her hands. She looked smaller than the building and more dangerous than she had the night before, because shame had finally turned into purpose. Owen Miller arrived last, carrying a brown folder under one arm. His work coat smelled of diesel and cold metal. He had shaved badly, leaving a strip under his jaw, and his hands shook until he noticed them and shoved them into his pockets. Tyler Pierce came from a side entrance on crutches. His right leg was wrapped from knee to ankle, his face pale from pain and whatever had been left of loyalty after the mountain finished with it. Tyler was 26, tall, blond, and built in the clean, privileged way of men who had never had to ask whether their boots would last another winter. But he looked younger that morning. Not innocent, just young enough for guilt to still surprise him. Across the hall stood Calvin Pierce. Grant had seen him in old photographs, but age had not humbled him. Calvin was 62, silver-haired, tall, and handsome in a way that looked maintained rather than natural. His dark wool coat fit perfectly. His leather gloves were tucked into one hand. His face carried public kindness with private calculation behind it. He looked like the kind of man who remembered names because names were cheaper than wages. Beside Calvin stood his attorney, Madeline Cross. Madeline was in her late 40s, slim, sharp-featured, and dressed in a charcoal suit that seemed untouched by weather. Her black hair was pulled into a neat knot. Her eyes were dark, intelligent, and dry. She had the calm of a woman who had spent years turning dirty facts into acceptable paragraphs. She glanced at Grant's worn jacket, Martha's trembling fingers, Owen's boots, Tyler's crutches, and finally Ruger. Her mouth did not change. That was skill. Dale Hargrove stood near the rear exit. He wore the same black winter jacket, same clean boots, same polite expression. In daylight, he looked less like a shadow and more like a man who had learned to stand near shadows until people mistook them for authority. When Ruger saw him, the dog did not growl. He only stood straighter. Dale noticed. The hearing room smelled of wet wool, floor polish, old wood, and coffee that had been punished too long on a burner. At the front sat 3 board members behind a raised table. The chair was Patricia Lane, 61, with silver hair cut just below her jaw and a face built for disappointing men who expected charm to work. She wore a dark blue blazer and half-moon glasses. Her voice, when she called the room to order, was low and plain enough to make whispers feel childish. To her right sat Dennis Holt, a retired fire chief with a broad chest, red ears, and a habit of pressing his thumb against his notebook when listening. To her left sat Anna Morales, a land use specialist in her 30s, small, composed, and exact, with black-rimmed glasses and a stack of color-coded maps arranged in front of her like a quiet warning. Madeline Cross spoke first for Aspen Crown Lodge. She did not say land grab. She said responsible temporary stewardship. She did not say destroyed shelter. She said deteriorated emergency structure. She did not say stolen supplies. She said unresolved inventory movement. She placed photographs on the screen. Elk Hollow's broken door, empty shelves, damaged radio, tilted sign, snow across the threshold. This facility, Madeline said, while historically meaningful, is no longer reliably maintained. Aspen Crown Lodge has offered temporary management support, road access improvements, and emergency coordination resources at no cost to the county during development review. Her voice was smooth enough to make theft sound like generosity. Then she turned slightly toward Grant. We should also acknowledge that Mr. Mercer has only recently returned to Silver Ridge. His military service is respected, but service, grief, and documented combat trauma can complicate judgment. He has attached himself to an injured, defensive animal and has made serious accusations against a project that would provide jobs to this community. Grant felt the room shift. There it was. Not an attack loud enough to offend decent people, just a careful hand placing doubt where fear could find it. His right fist closed under the table. From the hallway came the faint sound of Ruger's nails touching tile. Tap. One light scrape. Grant opened his hand. Truth, steady. Hands open. When Patricia Lane called his name, Grant stood. I do not know everything, he said. I have been gone a long time, that is true. I carry things from war I would rather not carry. Also true. But none of that changes what was done to Elk Hollow. He opened the evidence case. One kind of neglect leaves dust. Another leaves pry marks. The room grew still. Martha testified first. She walked to the front with the cassette tape in both hands. For a moment she looked as if the walk might break her. Then she placed the tape on the table and lifted her chin. My name is Martha Quinn. I worked county rescue dispatch for 32 years. I received Earl Mercer's final radio call from Elk Hollow. I altered the written report under pressure from my supervisor. A murmur moved through the room. Patricia Lane tapped one finger once. Silence returned. Martha continued. The original call reported a forced door, missing emergency supplies, a damaged radio cabinet, a moved trail marker, and an injured German shepherd chained behind the shelter. The report in county files says routine inspection during weather concern. That is false. I wrote the false version because I was afraid. Madeline Cross rose. Mrs. Quinn, you are admitting to falsifying a county record. Yes, Martha said. Her voice did not rise. I helped hide the truth. That does not make the truth disappear. Leah testified next. She did not dress the wounds in emotion. That made them harder to dismiss. She described Ruger's injuries, chain pressure trauma at the neck, malnutrition, torn pads, bruising along the shoulder, old trap scarring, and defensive behavior consistent with abuse, not uncontrolled aggression. Madeline asked, "Can you prove Aspen Crown caused those injuries?" Leah looked at her for a long second. I can prove someone restrained and starved a working dog and that the dog was found guarding evidence at a sabotaged rescue shelter. I will leave the miracle of coincidence to people with more imagination. Dennis Holt coughed into his hand. It might have hidden a laugh. It might not have. Owen came next. His folder shook when he opened it. He did not pretend otherwise. I hauled the supplies, he said. Blankets, batteries, first aid kits, food, propane, medical tins. I was told Elk Hollow was being decommissioned and supplies were moving to Aspen Crown storage under county direction. He handed over fuel slips, gate logs, delivery forms, and one receipt bearing Dale Hargrove's signature. Madeline pressed him hard. You accepted payment? Yes. You participated? Yes. So now you want to save yourself by accusing others? Owen looked at his hands, then at the board. A guilty man telling the truth is still guilty, he said. But the truth is not. Tyler Pierce struggled to the front on crutches. Calvin did not move, but the kindness left his face. Tyler swallowed before speaking. My father and Dale Hargrove sent me to photograph Elk Hollow before this hearing. I was told to document that it was unsafe, inactive, and beyond reasonable use. Dale told me which route to take. I followed the marker and crashed because the sign had been turned toward the wrong cut. Madeline's voice sharpened. Tyler, you are injured and under stress. I am also Calvin Pierce's son, Tyler said, and I know what I was sent to do. Grant placed Earl's final journal and the original rescue map on the evidence table last. He did not read every line. He read only the one that mattered. Do not let them make him into the weapon they need him to be. Truth steady. Hands open. For the first time, Calvin Pierce stood. His voice was gentle, almost wounded. I was saved at Elk Hollow years ago. I have never denied that. But gratitude cannot decide public land use. If Mr. Hargrove or a contractor overstepped, that should be reviewed. It should not destroy a project that could help Silver Ridge survive. It was nearly good enough. But the room now contained Martha's confession, Leah's report, Owen's receipts, Tyler's statement, Earl's maps, the cassette, the chain, and the ruined photographs of a shelter emptied to prove it was empty. Patricia Lane called a recess. Grant stepped into the hallway. Ruger lay near Leah's boots, head on paws. He looked up at Grant without demand, without praise, without the cheap comfort of victory. Grant sat on the bench across from him and breathed until the heat in his chest cooled into something useful. 34 minutes later, the board returned. Patricia Lane read from a single sheet. The request for temporary management transfer of Elk Hollow Rescue Cabin lands to Aspen Crown Lodge is suspended pending investigation. All materials presented today will be referred to County Legal Review and law enforcement. Dale Hargrove, Aspen Crown security contractors, and associated subcontractors are barred from access to Elk Hollow pending review. Calvin Pierce and Aspen Crown Lodge will provide all storage, transport, and internal communications records within 48 hours. Calvin's jaw tightened. Dale looked toward the rear door. Patricia continued. Temporary Emergency Management Authority for Elk Hollow Rescue Cabin is granted to Grant Mercer for 1 year, contingent on restoration of supplies, radio function, route markers, and monthly reporting. It was not triumph. It was a door kept open. Grant looked toward the hallway. Ruger's torn ear lifted as if he had heard only the part that mattered. Then the radio clipped to Dennis Holt's belt, cracked alive. A dispatcher's voice cut through static. "County emergency, we have a school bus stranded near Upper Silver Ridge Pass. 8 students, 1 teacher, 1 driver. Visibility worsening. Freight truck also missing contact near the same corridor. Nearest shelter point is Elk Hollow." The room froze. All the papers in Grant's hands suddenly weighed less than a single match. Chapter 7. The Light in the Snowstorm. The radio call changed the room faster than any ruling could have. A moment earlier, men and women had been sitting in the Silver Ridge County building with folders, maps, statements, and careful legal words. Then the dispatcher's voice cracked through the static and turned every paper on the table into something almost weightless. A school bus was stranded near the upper pass. 8 students, 1 teacher, 1 driver. Visibility falling. Temperature dropping. Nearest shelter point, Elk Hollow. Grant Mercer looked at Patricia Lane, then at the faces around the room. The board chair no longer looked like an official ending a hearing. She looked like a woman hearing a clock start inside a storm. Dennis Holt, the retired fire chief, was already on his feet. Ana Morales had one hand on the county map, her finger finding the pass before anyone asked. Ruger stood in the hallway. The German shepherd's torn ear lifted, his amber eyes fixed west toward the mountains, as if the radio had spoken in a language older than English. His neck was still bandaged. His body was still thin. His injured paw still favored the floor. But the moment the word Elk Hollow entered the air, he looked less like a wounded dog and more like a tired guard hearing his post called again. Grant closed Earl's journal. "All right," he said. "We bring the shelter back before the children reach it." No one asked whether they had permission. Some moments made permission sound foolish. Within 15 minutes, the county maintenance bay behind the building was open. The town moved in a way Grant had not expected from people who had spent weeks arguing about development, jobs, access roads, and the future. Blankets came first. Then sealed medical kits, radio batteries, dry socks, bottled water, canned soup, instant oatmeal, tea, flashlights, hand warmers, rope, firewood, kerosene, and 2 emergency lanterns. Owen Miller backed his tow truck to the loading doors. His broad, red face was set in hard lines, but his hands moved quickly, passing crates from one person to another. He did not speak unless necessary. Guilt, Grant thought, had finally found honest work. Martha Quinn took over a radio desk in the corner of the bay. She sat beneath a flickering fluorescent light with headphones too large for her narrow face, a fresh logbook open in front of her, and a pencil tied to the clipboard with string. Martha had spent years changing one hard truth into an easier line. Now she wrote every word exactly. Her voice, when she checked the frequency, was dry, steady, and almost young. "Elk Hollow team, this is Silver Ridge Relay. I hear you." "Go." Leah Carter loaded her medical bag with the calm fury of a woman who hated preventable suffering. She added bandages, glucose packets, children's gloves, fever blankets, and a small tin of dog treats she pretended not to notice Grant noticing. "They are for morale," she said. "Whose?" "That depends who behaves better." A few townspeople joined them. Maria Bell, a grocery clerk in her 50s with round shoulders and silver-streaked black hair, brought 3 boxes of soup from the market and said her brother had once slept through a blizzard at Elk Hollow. Tom Rask, a retired mechanic with a limp and a white beard stained by coffee, carried a crate of batteries and admitted he had attended Calvin Pierce's public meeting because he needed work for his son. A young deputy named Aaron Pike, thin, nervous, and fresh-faced beneath his wool cap, loaded rope with both hands shaking from cold and responsibility. None of them made speeches. That helped. Big words froze quickly. Small deeds kept their heat. They drove as far as the road allowed. Owen's tow truck went first. Grant's red Ford followed, and the county emergency pickup crawled behind them with its hazard lights blinking dimly through the blowing snow. The storm had returned with a white force that erased the difference between road and ditch. Pines appeared in the headlights, vanished, then appeared again closer than they should have. When the vehicles could go no farther, they carried supplies the rest of the way. Ruger moved ahead. Not on a leash, not commanded, not praised. He simply took the lead, because the mountain had become too blind for human eyes. His tracks cut across the snow with slow certainty, one paw print weaker than the rest, but still forward. Grant followed with a crate of radio batteries against his chest and Earl's wooden cross tucked under his shirt. The cross was small, but he felt it there, a warm pressure against the old cold in him. Elk Hollow appeared out of the storm like a memory, deciding not to die. The door still hung badly. The sign still bore the scar where someone had scratched through "Rescue." Snow lay across the threshold, but now hands moved over it. Owen and Tom braced the door. Aaron cleared the entry. Leah set medical supplies on the table. Maria stacked soup and socks beneath the shelf. Grant installed batteries in the radio unit and waited until the little green light blinked alive. Static hissed. Then Martha's voice came through. "Elk Hollow, Silver Ridge Relay. Status?" Grant pressed the button. "Cold, standing, breathing." There was a pause. "Copy," Martha said, her voice softened by one grain. "Cold, standing, breathing." They lit the stove. The first flame was small and uncertain, bending under a poor draft. Grant shielded it with one hand until the kindling caught. Smoke coughed, then climbed. The stovepipe drew with a tired groan. Heat entered the cabin slowly, like an old promise returning to work. Ruger stood at the door, nose into the storm. Then he was gone. "Grant," Leah said. "I see him." Grant took a lantern and followed. Owen came with rope. Aaron tried to follow too, but Grant shook his head. "Stay with the shelter. Children first when they come." Ruger's shape moved ahead through the white, sometimes visible, sometimes only a darker thought between trees. The dog did not take the road. He cut down along a shallow drainage line and then up toward a ridge where the wind struck harder. Grant's knee screamed with each step. He kept moving. Pain was information. The children were the mission. They found the bus half off the road near a bend where the snow had drifted high against the tires. It was yellow beneath the ice, tilted slightly toward the ditch, its windows fogged from the frightened breathing inside. The driver's side mirror was broken. One rear wheel had dropped into the snowbank. The engine was silent. Inside, 8 children sat bundled together in coats, hats, and fear. Most were middle school age, faces pale behind frosted glass. The driver, Lisa Moreno, opened the door with stiff hands. She was 38, compact and dark-haired with a strong jaw and eyes sharpened by responsibility. She wore a bus company jacket over a sweater, and her lips were blue at the edges. Behind her stood Claire Donnelly, the teacher, a tall, thin woman in her early 30s with auburn hair escaping from a knit cap and the strained gentleness of someone trying not to frighten children who were already frightened enough. "I kept them together," Lisa said. Grant nodded. "You did your job. Now we move." Ruger climbed the bus steps first. One girl whispered, "Is he ours?" "No," Claire said softly. Grant looked at Ruger, who stood in the aisle with snow on his torn ear and judgment in his eyes. "He is his own," Grant said. "But tonight, he is helping." They wrapped the children 2 by 2 in emergency blankets. Owen carried the smallest boy when his legs shook too badly. Lisa refused help until she nearly fell on the bus steps, then accepted Grant's arm without looking at him. Claire counted the students again and again under her breath, as if numbers could become prayer if repeated with enough love. The walk back to Elk Hollow felt longer than the mountain had any right to be. The children were quiet at first. That worried Grant more than crying would have. Then one boy asked if his science project would freeze in the bus. Owen told him machines were tougher than people thought, and people were tougher than machines hoped. The boy considered this nonsense with grave seriousness and kept walking. When the shelter door opened, heat and lantern light spilled out. Not much. Enough. Leah took command with sharp tenderness. Wet gloves off, boots lined under the bench, fingers checked, ears checked. Warm tea first, not too fast. Blankets close, no crowding the stove. Maria passed cups from child to child. Tom added wood. Aaron radioed Martha. Grant stood near the door while the room filled with breath, steam, fear leaving small bodies, and life returning one cup at a time. Ruger lay across the threshold, head on his paws, facing the storm as if the night might still try to take something back. By morning, everyone was alive. The children were carried down after the road crews reached the lower bend. Parents cried into wool hats and county jackets. Lisa Moreno hugged Claire Donnelly so hard both women nearly fell. One student tried to thank Ruger with half a granola bar. Ruger turned his head away with such offended dignity that the boy whispered, "He is kind of rude." Grant said, "Only to people he likes." The story moved through Silver Ridge before official statements could polish it. Within weeks, the investigation did what truth sometimes did when people finally stopped stepping over it. Dale Hargrove was arrested for sabotage of emergency property, animal cruelty, intimidation of witnesses, and falsifying reports. He did not look calm in the photograph printed in the county paper. Calvin Pierce lost development access to the Aspen Crown route and came under investigation for bribery, hidden transport orders, and manipulation of land records. His public statement used words like cooperation and misunderstanding. People listened differently now. Once a town has seen children warming their hands beside a stove that almost got removed for profit, polished words lose some shine. Martha returned to radio duty every Tuesday night. No one called it redemption aloud. She would have hated that. She simply wrote the hard lines straight. Owen repaired the Elk Hollow roof, replaced the door frame, hauled wood, and delivered supplies without charging. When Grant told him money did not settle every debt, Owen only nodded. "Then I will work square," he said. Grant did not sell Earl's cabin. The estate papers stayed folded in a drawer beneath the old maps. Some decisions did not need to slam doors. They only needed to stop packing. By late winter, Elk Hollow stood ugly and useful again. Its roof held, the stove drew clean, the radio worked, the shelves carried blankets, medicine, batteries, dry socks, tea, soup, and firewood. Grant carved a new sign from an old plank in Earl's shed. His letters were uneven but honest. If this place warmed you in a storm, leave warmth for the one who comes after. He hung it above the door while Leah pretended not to hover near his bad knee. Martha touched the frame once and stepped back. Owen looked down until the moment passed. Nobody clapped. Clapping would have made the words smaller. Ruger healed slowly. His ribs stopped showing so sharply. His coat thickened. The scar around his neck became a pale ring beneath new fur. He still limped when the weather changed. He still refused collars. Grant once placed a soft leather one beside his food bowl, not buckled, not forced, only offered. Ruger picked it up, carried it to the porch, and dropped it in the snow with such clarity that Grant apologized aloud. After that, nothing circled Ruger's neck but air. One soft night, snow began falling without anger. Grant sat inside Earl's cabin, the stove burning low, Earl's wooden cross on the table beside the old blood-stained towel, now washed but never quite clean. Outside, paw steps crossed the porch. Grant looked through the window. Ruger came out of the trees, no leash, no chain, no command pulling him home. He climbed the steps, circled once, and lay down before the blue door with his muzzle on his paws. Not a prisoner, not a mascot, not a wounded thing kept because pity had strong hands. A free creature choosing where to rest. Grant opened the door. "Your porch?" he asked. Ruger blinked slowly as if the question lacked professional seriousness. Grant looked past him toward the mountains. Silver Ridge breathed cold and wide beneath the stars. It no longer looked like a place where grief had been waiting to claim him. It looked like a place where one small fire could lead another traveler home. Sometimes God's mercy did not arrive with thunder. Sometimes it came as a dog track in new snow, a blood-stained towel in a loyal mouth, a neighbor brave enough to correct an old lie, and a tired man choosing to stay when leaving would have been easier. Grant stepped aside. "All right," he said. "Our porch, then." And this time, Ruger came in. Most people might have seen a wounded dog on a frozen mountain road and kept driving. Some might have told themselves it was only a stray, only a storm, only someone else's problem. But Grant Mercer stopped, because Ruger was still standing. Elk Hollow was still waiting. 8 children still needed warmth, and somewhere beneath all that snow, Earl Mercer's final truth was still asking to be found. That kind of loyalty does not beg for attention. It carries a blood-stained towel through a storm and waits until one tired man finally understands. Tonight, I pray God blesses your home, protects the people you love, heals the wounds you carry in silence, and gives you the courage to stop when someone helpless is asking for help without words. If Grant and Ruger's story touched your heart, write Amen in the comments. And if you believe in loyalty, faith, second chances, and the quiet miracles God still sends through faithful dogs, subscribe and stay with us. The Grant story was not the last time a loyal canine refused to let the truth stay buried. Wait until I tell you about the retired Marine who found a starving German Shepherd locked inside an abandoned police cruiser during a midnight storm. That story begins with a missing handler, a burned evidence box, and a dog who would not leave one frozen roadside no matter how hard the officers tried to pull him away. And trust me, when that Marine opened the back door and saw what the dog was guarding, even the sheriff could not speak. Subscribe to the channel now, because this next story is one you definitely do not want to miss.